Hello YouTube, my name's Sean Connors and welcome back to Outsiders, and today we're going to be talking about another advanced video series. And again, just for reference, if you catch this video for the first time, this is a chain of videos starting at Av1 and working its way all the way to where we are today, which is going to be 7.2. Now today we're going to be looking at the next steps, and I was planning on going into the next bit regarding around storyboarding and stuff, but again I realised, like the last video, that there was another little piece that just had to be done first. So I do apologise, it feels like deja vu, but it must be put in first, because otherwise if I don't do it, then of course I'd have to come back to it and it will just miss out where I wanted the chain of advanced videos to go. So without further ado, let's crack on with today's piece. It's basically about dungeons and other unrelated adventures, effectively. Unstructured adventures. And talking about that particular medium in terms of both plot hooks, the character types, and why they're still so popular. So let's have a little think about that. So basically, why are dungeons and other sort of unstructured adventures, why are they still so popular, particularly dungeons? Well, basically they're popular because they're a great place for beginning GMs to begin with. You don't really have to worry about the plot at all. You know, we talked about plot hooks and all this stuff. Well, of course, this is relevant. You don't need to worry about them, really. Basically, the plot of this type of a dungeon can just be arbitrary. It can just be the order in which the players decide to handle the various situations in front of them. And anybody that has any module to hand will see quite simply that as you go in one room, you may be faced with only 2 or 3 choices, and those choices are fairly obvious. Naturally, certain types of people, particularly story type of players, are going to find the whole process of just a dungeon type game very unsatisfying for their type. But in many of the cases of the player types, as we will see, most of them find it very acceptable. It's perfectly okay medium. Your group might love them too. I know that I do. I'm still a huge fan of dungeon bashes, I think is the word that generally used for them. I mean, my game may be different. I mean, I may put a lot more deeper spin on the dungeon. You know, the ecology, the whole thing that goes, why is the dungeon where it is? Why are these creatures related to it? I might think of all those things. But in essence, if I don't want to, this is the beauty of a good old-fashioned dungeon. You could literally bolt on whatever you want. So as a starting point, of course, it's very good. I suppose the other thing you could say is the best feature of it is it's just very easy to execute. I mean, that's the other thing. And if you wanted to, there's actually nothing to say each area can just be a unique, separate piece, not related in the slightest. Mine might happen to have to be thought that way, but that isn't really what a good old-fashioned dungeon is. It's in essence why I think many of us, when we look back at old school gaming, and it's one of the really weird things. I mean, there's been a lot of videos on old school gaming on the community. But it struck me that when I look back at the early games, I thought to myself, yes, of course, you know, I look back with fond memories. But here we are now, we've been on a journey, and I'm going to have to use my hands here. It's the yin and yang of that journey. In the past, the systems were, of course, rules light, and they had to be, you had to make a lot of the interpretations. So the system, as I've said in my little continuum of crunchiness, as you may recall, going back in the videos, it effectively means that you, the GM, are empowered to make those calls. When you come up to the more modern day systems, anything that's got tactical movement and various other things brought in, Pathfinder is the best example of the bunch. It's obviously rules heavy, but therefore flavours the bears, far more power creep, there's all those sort of things that come in. And it's just what's best for your group. And I think sometimes when we look back, we forget the reason we played and enjoyed it so much was that it didn't actually have to have that deepness. You could just come along, have some fun, and let go. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can tell as well, if you think about why the dungeon, a dungeon bash, is a popular medium, it would be fairly obvious if you start looking at the player types. I mean, if you take your butt kickers, they're going to have a field day. They're going to love that. Your power gamers are going to be happy because they know that they're going to, you know, there's going to be stuff in there. And as we said before, you know, obviously if you can get your best stuff to the end, it just gives them an even bigger reason to want to explore the place. Power gamers, most specialists, because you have to obviously depends on what the specialism is and what the role, but they'll probably have a field day as well in this, and casual types will not mind this type of genre at all. So a large chunk of the player types in a simple little bash, in a simple little story, are fairly easy catered for, and will probably quite happily play that medium for quite some time to come. So you can see, if you relay the whole thing back together, just think about it here, obviously you can see why, as a medium, it's still very popular. And if anybody puts up a game in their local, forum threads or local community, the gaming groups, wherever you do it, and you just say, look, I'm going to do an old-fashioned Dungeon Bash style game, and who would be interested, you're going to get a lot of players gravitating to that table, because the fact that it's old style dungeon bashing, even in a modern system, it's going to appeal to a lot of player types who are going to have a field day, really enjoy that sort of thing. So you're going to be okay. What you have to do with it, thinking about the final 3 player types, obviously the tacticians should, in theory, enjoy it, but that does require you to think about the combats in a little bit more depth, which is not normally the traditional route of old school, kick down the door, take names, that sort of thing. But it's not that difficult to apply, particularly in the modern settings. It's just another nice element that's quite a lot of fun. But the players that are going to struggle the most, of course, the method actors are it's going to really struggle unless you as a GM can come to terms with building deeper stories, immersive stories within that, which is quite tough. And obviously the storytellers are going to have a nightmare, because they're just not going to feel the love, and after a few sessions they are probably going to vote with their feet and be gone. So you can pretty quickly see that as a style, though, it's actually a quite good one for a starting GM, because you're going to appease quite a lot of players, and it can just be as much fun as some of the most amazingly deep and detailed games for completely different reasons, and we must never lose sight of this very important palette colour. In my view, many DMs' in my view, many DMs tire of this style, though, of gaming long before the players do. Now, I think this is a very valid point, because one of the things that really I think about is, often you'll hear people say, I need to go back, I need to go retro gaming, I need to get back into that, where's the fun, where's the love for the game gone? And so they go back, and they want to look at, Osric style games, first edition games, they go back and start running it, and then they realise a bit of a truism, some of them, not all of them, but some of them will realise a truism, that you are looking back with rose-tinted glasses, and that because you're not able to be creative, and I'm talking here about more experienced GMs when I'm talking about this point, you're not able to be as creative. You'll find the players don't mind. You could put the weirdest of creature combinations in dungeon bashing, or it only has to have a very, very loose plot to be fun for the players. And remember, I said, a couple of back about the sum of the parts can be greater than the whole, but this is where you have to be very careful, because the GM will tire long before the players. And I think you would know as well, as experienced GMs, and maybe not so experienced, but you would know that this point is actually true and should resonate with you, that you think, yeah, I have tired of certain styles of play that I wanted to try and bring back. I've done it. I know myself. I've been there, and I've made that error, and realised that although it's been great, the players are loving it. They're having a great time, and I'm thinking, oh God, I don't like this. But I've sort of I've almost created a problem for myself, a rod for my own back, and I've ended up. You almost see it. You have to see it through sometimes. But as I say, a bored GM runs boring games in the end, and the love, if it's not there, you can't shine through. So you have to think about it in terms of what it is you're trying to achieve as a more experienced GM over a beginning GM. For a beginning GM, this medium of unstructured, unrelated stories, not following any of the rules that we've discussed already, is perfectly acceptable and will appeal to a lot of people. And if you advertise it well enough, you're probably going to attract the right sort of people to your game. So you'll have every opportunity to make mistakes, find your feet, and learn from it, and become a more experienced GM in time, and look for the deeper game that you're looking for. But don't be in the slightest bit surprised that in 2 or 3 years down the line, when you've gone beyond your dungeon bashing and more into your deeper submersive type games, maybe you tried some storytelling games out because you've heard they're really fun, and then you yearn for something to go back again, you'll find this quandary sits there that, yeah, it was fun for a few sessions, but yeah, it's not. I can't really use my creative juices, and that's what a lot of GMs are in it for. So it's another one of these interesting dilemma pieces that exists, but is critical to talk about within the video series of all the advanced tips that we've been talking about. So let us move on to the last few pieces in this. To be honest, before I do, that also reminds me of something. And the reason why GMs tire of it I should remember this. It's very important. Is because the 100th dungeon encounter is very much like the 10th. So boredom would set in for those GMs. They're not finding, even though there might be some tactical things you can do, there isn't the deeper plot that they want, that they yearn to be there. So that's the reason why it should resonate with some of you. That's the reason. Another reason why this style of GMing can be easy for beginning GMs, and it can be good for anybody actually, is the fact that you can bolt on a room at any moment. You could take a room and add a piece on, and because it is completely unrelated, the adventure can be very unstructured, almost mismatched. You can literally pick 50 rooms and just populate them with 50 different things, and you can come up with a very simple backstory for how that is done. I've done it myself. I mean, I remember writing a piece. It's quite a popular piece actually, about back in 3rd edition days, where I wrote a dungeon piece where it was a old structure buried underneath the ground that had been recently rediscovered, and the group were one of the very first groups to go and have a look at it. It's a classic dungeon, but in each of the rooms, in some sort of stasis, was a very unique, because it was originally the complex was run by, as odd as it may sound, like these dark druids who had put various unusual monsters in a stasis, but as soon as the room was entered and violated, then these things come out of stasis. So it was a completely simple story for what could be in it. It could be completely unrelated. Players loved it, and it was fun, but it's not something I want to do all the time, put it that way. But I just thought I'd throw that in. So obviously you can add anything you like on, and that's the beauty of it. You don't actually have to also worry about really NPCs. You don't have to get into their persona. You don't have to put their voices on. It's not actually that intrinsically important. Yes, you can have minor encounters before the characters go off and do some exploring, or even some administration after the games could be run with a bit of aplomb with your skills. But really, you don't have to. And the nice thing is, you again can get your feet first and then find your voices later, if that makes sense. Your main concern, really, for any GM at any level is a very simple one, and it's particularly relevant in any system. And it's a word that a lot of GMs don't like using anymore, which is balance. But there is a truth to this. Balance is an important factor, particularly in the yin and yang of the systems, because it doesn't matter what system you used. You still had to pick your creatures with some skill based on the player types around you. If you didn't, you are asking for immediate, partial or total party kills. If you get the balance just right, it's a tremendous challenge, which is the key. It should be a challenge. The ratio of how much your players can handle in any one session, that comes from time and your own player types around that table. But the balance question will always be there. As the systems have progressed over the years, balance has become a much more easier thing to do as a GM, because the books tell you exactly what you need to do. I've realised I'm running at 14 minutes and I will need to now bring this part to a close, but final point on this is simply this. If you and your players are enjoying this medium, you enjoy the Dungeon Bash or unrelated story structure, let no one tell you there's anything wrong with it, and you go ahead and run a fantastic game and ignore all the rest of the advice that I have to offer, because whatever you're doing, it's working, and it's working for you. So have fun with it. Anyway, I've been Sean Connors. This has been Outsiders. Till next time, take care of yourselves and happy gaming.